Imagine this. You're sitting on a plane, buckled in, ready for takeoff. The hum of the engines fills the cabin, and the flight attendants are making their final rounds, ensuring everything is in order. But then, something happens. Something that makes everyone's head turn. A young boy, no older than 10, is being scolded by a flight attendant. Her voice is sharp, her tone unyielding. The boy, wide-eyed and confused, tries to explain himself, but she's not having it. And then, in a moment that leaves the entire cabin in stunned silence, she tells him to get off the plane. Just like that. No warning, no second chances. But what she doesn't know, what none of them know, is that this isn't just any young boy. His mom? She owns the airline, and she's about to make sure this flight attendant never forgets it. This is the kind of story that makes you stop scrolling. It's the kind of story that makes you think, what would I do if I were there? It's a story about power, privilege, and the unexpected twists life throws at us when we least expect it. But more than that, it's a story about a mother's love and the lengths she'll go to protect her child. So, buckle up, because this isn't your average flight. This is a journey that will take you from the tarmac to the boardroom, from outrage to justice, and from disbelief to the kind of satisfaction that only comes when the underdog, or in this case, the underkid, gets the last word. Let's set the scene. The boy, let's call him Jordan, is traveling alone for the first time. He's nervous but excited, clutching his backpack like it's his lifeline. His mom, a successful businesswoman who's built her airline from the ground up, has arranged for him to fly first class. She's given him all the instructions. Stay in your seat, be polite, and if you need anything, ask the flight attendant. Simple, right? But things don't always go as planned. Jordan, being a curious kid, decides to explore a little. He wanders down the aisle, peeking into the galley, maybe even pressing a button or two. Harmless kid stuff. But to the flight attendant, it's a problem. A big one. Enter Sarah, the flight attendant. She's been in the business for years, and she's seen it all. Passengers who don't follow the rules are her pet peeve, and she's not about to let a kid, no matter how young, get away with it. She confronts Jordan, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. You can't just wander around like this. Do you know how dangerous that is? Jordan, startled, tries to apologize, but Sarah's not listening. She's made up her mind. I'm sorry, but you're going to have to get off this plane. The words hang in the air like a storm cloud. Jordan's face falls. The other passengers exchange uneasy glances. No one knows what to do. But here's the thing. Jordan's mom, let's call her Lisa, isn't just any mom. She's the CEO of the airline, and she's been watching everything unfold from the terminal. You see, Lisa had a meeting at the airport and decided to surprise Jordan by seeing him off. But when she sees her son being escorted off the plane, her heart sinks. Then, it ignites. She storms over, her heels clicking against the floor, her eyes blazing. What's going on here? She demands. Sarah, still unaware of who she's dealing with, stands her ground. This young man was causing a disturbance. He's been removed from the flight. Lisa's jaw tightens. Do you know who I am? She asks, her voice low and steady. Sarah hesitates, sensing she's made a mistake, but not yet understanding how big it is. And that's where we'll leave it for now. Because what happens next? Well, let's just say it's going to change everything. For Jordan, for Sarah, and for everyone on that plane. This isn't just a story about a flight gone wrong. It's a story about assumptions, consequences, and the power of standing up for what's right. So, what do you think happens next? Stick around, because this is one flight you won't want to miss. Lisa's question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Do you know who I am? The words weren't just a challenge. They were a warning. Sarah, the flight attendant, blinked. her confidence faltering for the first time. She glanced at Lisa, taking in her sharp business suit, the way she carried herself with an air of authority that didn't come from arrogance, but from experience. Sarah's mind raced. Who was this woman? And more importantly, why did she suddenly feel like she'd just made the biggest mistake of her career? Meanwhile, Jordan stood between them, his small frame trembling. He looked up at his mom, his eyes wide with a mix of relief and guilt. He hadn't meant to cause trouble. He was just a kid, curious and full of energy, eager to explore the world around him. But now, he felt like he'd done something terribly wrong. Lisa placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, her touch steadying him. She didn't say anything to him yet, but her presence alone was enough to let him know everything would be okay. For now, her focus was on Sarah. The other passengers were frozen in their seats, their attention glued to the scene unfolding before them. Whispers began to ripple through the cabin. "Who is she?" someone murmured. "Do you think she's someone important?" Another asked. No one had the answers, but everyone could feel the tension thickening like a storm about to break. The pilot, alerted by the commotion, stepped out of the cockpit, his expression a mix of concern and confusion. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice cutting through the uneasy silence. Sarah, still trying to regain her composure, straightened her posture. "This young boy was causing a disturbance," she repeated, though her voice lacked the conviction it had earlier. "I was just following protocol." Lisa's eyes narrowed. "Protocol?" she echoed, her tone icy. "Your protocol involves removing a child from a flight without even attempting to contact his guardian." Without considering the circumstances, Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She hadn't thought to ask Jordan if he was traveling alone or if there was someone who could vouch for him. In her mind, he was just another unruly passenger who needed to be dealt with swiftly. But now, faced with Lisa's piercing gaze, she realized how wrong she might have been. Lisa turned to the pilot, her demeanor shifting from anger to authority. "I'm Lisa Carter," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm the CEO of this airline, and this," she gestured to Jordan, "is my son." The words landed like a bombshell. Sarah's face went pale. The pilot's eyes widened in shock. Even the passengers, who had been quietly observing, gasped in unison. The CEO, the woman who owned the airline, was standing right there, in the middle of the cabin, and her son had just been kicked off the plane. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a full-blown disaster. The pilot quickly stepped forward, his tone shifting to one of respect and urgency. "Miss Carter, I had no idea," he began, but Lisa cut him off with a raised hand. "I don't blame you," she said, her voice steady. "But I do expect this situation to be handled appropriately. Immediately." The pilot nodded, his mind racing. He turned to Sarah, his expression a mix of disappointment and frustration. "We need to resolve this. Now." Sarah swallowed hard, her earlier confidence completely shattered. She looked at Lisa, then at Jordan, and finally, at the pilot. I didn't know," she stammered. "I was just trying to do my job." Lisa's gaze softened slightly, but only for a moment. "I understand that," she said. "But part of your job is to assess situations carefully and act with empathy. This wasn't just a passenger. This was a child. My child." Her words were measured, but the weight behind them was undeniable. Sarah nodded, her eyes downcast. She knew she'd messed up, but the realization was only just sinking in. This wasn't just about losing her job. It was about the trust she'd broken, not just with Lisa, but with everyone on that plane. As the tension in the cabin reached its peak, Lisa made a decision. She turned to the pilot. "I'll be taking my seat now," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And my son will be joining me. We'll discuss this matter further once we've reached our destination." The pilot nodded again, relief washing over him. At least for now, the immediate crisis had been averted. He gestured for Sarah to step aside, and she did so without a word, her face flushed with embarrassment. Lisa guided Jordan to his seat, her hand still resting protectively on his shoulder. As they settled in, the other passengers began to murmur among themselves, the shock of what had just happened still fresh in their minds. Some were sympathetic to Sarah, recognizing that she'd been put in a difficult position. Others were firmly on Lisa's side, appalled that a child had been treated so harshly. But one thing was clear: this wasn't over, not by a long shot. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Lisa leaned down to Jordan, her voice soft but firm. "Are you okay?" she asked. He nodded, though his eyes were still filled with uncertainty. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," he whispered. Lisa smiled, gently, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I know you didn't," she said, "but sometimes things happen that are out of our control. What matters is how we handle them." Jordan nodded again, though he wasn't entirely sure what she meant. For now, he was just glad to have his mom by his side. But as the plane taxied down the runway, Lisa's mind was already racing ahead. She knew this incident wasn't just about Jordan or Sarah. It was about the culture of her airline, the values it stood for, and the way its employees treated its passengers. She had built this company from the ground up, pouring her heart and soul into every decision, every policy, every detail. And now, in one moment, all of that had been called into question. She couldn't let this slide, not just as a CEO, but as a mother. As the plane climbed into the sky, the cabin grew quieter, the hum of the engines lulling some passengers into a sense of calm. But for Lisa, the real work was just beginning. She glanced at Jordan, who was already dozing off, his head resting against the window. Then she looked down the aisle, where Sarah was quietly going about her duties, her earlier confidence replaced by a palpable unease. Lisa's jaw tightened. This wasn't just about one flight attendant's mistake. This was about accountability, and she was determined to see it through. But what would that look like? Would Sarah lose her job? Would there be a public apology? Or would something even bigger come out of this? The questions swirled in Lisa's mind, each one more pressing than the last. One thing was certain: by the time this plane landed, nothing would be the same. For Lisa, for Sarah, and for everyone on board, this was more than just a flight. It was a turning point, and the real story was only just beginning.